The cold had stolen every last shred of warmth from Theresa Riley's body when she finally surrendered to the snow, her knees buckling beneath her threadbare skirts as the blizzard screamed its fury across the Texas Panhandle in February of 1882. Bennett Quinn had been riding for 3 days straight, pushing through weather that no sensible man would dare challenge, when his horse suddenly stopped and refused to take another step forward. The chestnut mare stomped her hooves and tossed her head, her breath coming out in great plumes of white vapor that the wind immediately snatched away. Bennett trusted his horse more than he trusted most people, so when she planted her feet and whinnied with urgency, he knew something was terribly wrong. He squinted through the driving snow, pulling his wool scarf down from his face despite the biting cold that immediately stung his weathered cheeks. That was when he saw her, a dark shape against the endless white, crumpled and still as death itself. Bennett was off his horse before conscious thought could catch up with instinct. He ran through snow that came up past his knees, his long coat whipping behind him like a banner in the relentless wind. When he reached her, he dropped to his knees and carefully turned her over, brushing away the snow that had already begun to claim her as its own. Her lips had turned a frightening shade of blue, and her skin felt like ice beneath his gloved hands. For one terrible moment he thought he was too late, but then he felt it, the faintest flutter of breath against his palm when he held it near her nose. "No, no, no," Bennett muttered, already stripping off his heavy coat. "You are not dying out here, not today, not while I have breath in my body." He wrapped his coat around her slight frame and lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel every bone in her body even through the layers of fabric. How long had she been out here? How far had she walked before the cold had taken her down? These questions would have to wait. Right now, survival was all that mattered. Getting her onto his horse took some maneuvering, but Bennett had spent 32 years learning to do difficult things under impossible circumstances. He mounted behind her, pulling her back against his chest and wrapping his arms around her to hold her in place and share what warmth his body could offer. His mare seemed to understand the urgency of the situation and began moving forward without prompting, her head lowered against the wind as she picked her way through the drifts. Bennett had been heading to Fort Worth when the storm had caught him, but that was still 2 days' ride under normal conditions. In this weather, it might as well have been on the other side of the moon. He needed shelter, and he needed it fast. He remembered passing an old trapper's cabin about an hour back, built into the side of a low hill. It would not be much, but it would be better than nothing, and nothing was exactly what they would have if they tried to push through this blizzard. "You are going to be all right," he said to the unconscious woman in his arms, knowing she could not hear him but needing to say the words anyway. "You will walk beside me in warmth. I promise you that. You just have to hold on a little longer." The ride back to the cabin felt like it took years instead of the hour it actually was. By the time the squat structure came into view, Bennett's teeth were chattering so hard he thought they might crack, and he had lost all feeling in his feet. He could only imagine what the woman in his arms was experiencing, though her stillness frightened him more than any struggle would have. The cabin door had swollen in its frame from moisture and age, and it took Bennett 3 tries to kick it open, each impact sending jolts of pain up his frozen legs. Inside was dark and musty, but it was blissfully free of wind, and that was enough. He laid the woman down as gently as he could on the rough wooden floor and immediately set about building a fire in the stone hearth. His hands were clumsy with cold, but muscle memory guided them through the familiar motions. Soon, flames were licking at the dry wood someone, probably another desperate traveler, had left stacked beside the fireplace. With light now filling the small space, Bennett got his first good look at the woman he had rescued. She was young, probably no more than 22 or 23, with dark hair that hung in wet tangles around a face that would have been pretty if it had not been so gaunt and pale. Her clothes were poor quality and worn thin, the kind of garments that spoke of hard times and harder choices. Her hands were raw and work roughened, the nails broken and dirty. Whatever story had brought her out into the storm, it was not a happy one. Bennett knew he needed to get her out of her wet clothes, but propriety warred with practicality in his mind. Propriety lost, as it always did when life hung in the balance. He worked quickly and kept his eyes averted as much as possible, removing her sodden dress and the thin cotton shift beneath. Her body was covered in bruises, some old and yellowing, others fresh and dark. Anger kindled hot in Bennett's chest, but he pushed it aside. She needed care, not rage. He wrapped her in both of their coats and his extra shirt, then arranged her as close to the fire as he dared. He chafed her hands and feet, trying to restore circulation. Terrified he would find signs of frostbite, but relieved when her skin began to pinken under his ministrations. While he worked, he kept talking to her, telling her about his horse, about the ridiculous hat his brother wore, about anything and everything that came into his head, just so she would have a voice to follow back to consciousness if she could hear him at all. It was nearly an hour before her eyelids finally fluttered. Bennett leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. Her eyes opened slowly, revealing irises the color of spring clover, confused and unfocused at first, then sharpening into panic as she realized she was not alone. "Easy," Bennett said softly, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. "Easy now. You are safe. I found you in the snow, do you remember?" She stared at him for a long moment, her breathing quick and shallow, then slowly shook her head. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Bennett reached for his canteen and carefully lifted her head so she could take a small sip of water. She coughed, then tried again. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough as sandpaper. "Old Trapper's cabin about 30 miles north of Fort Worth. There's a blizzard raging outside, so we are stuck here until it passes. My name is Bennett Quinn. What's yours?" She hesitated, and he could see her weighing whether to trust him. Finally, she whispered, Theresa Riley." "Well, Miss Riley, I am very glad I found you when I did." Another hour and... He did not finish the sentence. They both knew how it would have ended. Tears welled up in her green eyes and spilled down her cheeks. "I thought I was dead. I wanted to be dead." The simple honesty of those words hit Bennett harder than any fist ever had. He sat back on his heels, studying her drawn face. "What were you running from?" Theresa closed her eyes. "Everything. Everyone. Does it matter? It might if whoever you were running from comes looking for you." A bitter laugh escaped her cracked lips. "No one will come looking for me. I am not worth the effort." She opened her eyes again and met his gaze directly. "Why did you help me? Most men would have ridden past." Bennett considered the question. It was a fair one. "I reckon because my mama raised me to believe that every life has value, even when the person living it does not think so. And because my horse stopped. She is smarter than I am, most days." This drew a faint smile from Theresa, the first expression beyond pain and fear he had seen on her face. It transformed her entirely, giving him a glimpse of the woman she might be when not half dead from cold and despair. "I need to hang your dress by the fire to dry," Bennett said, changing the subject before the moment could become too weighted. "I brought some jerky and hardtack in my saddlebags. It is not much, but it will keep your strength up until the storm passes and we can get to Fort Worth." "Fort Worth," Theresa repeated, her brow furrowing. "I was trying to get to Fort Worth. My aunt lives there, or at least she did 5 years ago." I thought maybe she would take me in, help me start over. What is her name? I know Fort Worth fairly well. I might know her. Margaret Bloom. She ran a boarding house on the south side of town. Bennett nodded slowly. Mrs. Bloom. Yes, I know her. Good woman. Lost her husband to cholera back in '77. She still runs that boarding house, though from what I hear, she has not been in the best of health lately. Relief flooded Theresa's face, so profound that fresh tears sprang to her eyes. She is alive. Thank God. I had no way of knowing, but I had to try. I had nowhere else to go. Over the next several hours, as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, the full story came tumbling out of Theresa in fits and starts. She had grown up in a small town in East Texas, the daughter of a farmer who drank too much and a mother who had died giving birth to her. Her father had remarried when Theresa was 12, and her stepmother had made her life a living hell, working her like a mule and beating her for the smallest infractions. When her father died 2 years ago, her stepmother had wasted no time in marrying Theresa off to a man 3 times her age, a cruel widower named Silas Hargrove, who wanted a young wife to cook and clean and warm his bed. The bruises on her body, Bennett realized with a cold fury settling in his gut, were Hargrove's work. Theresa did not go into detail, and Bennett did not push, but the haunted look in her eyes told him more than words ever could. 3 weeks ago, Hargrove had beaten her so badly she could barely stand. Something had broken inside her that night, some final thread of endurance that had kept her tethered to a life she hated. The next day, while Hargrove was in town, she had taken what little she could carry and run. She had been walking for weeks, sleeping in barns when she could find them, going hungry more often than not. The blizzard had caught her 2 days out from Fort Worth, and she had pushed on because turning back meant death just as surely as freezing in the snow did. At least freezing would be quick. "I am sorry," Bennett said when she finished, inadequate words for an inadequate world. "No one should have to live like that." Theresa pulled the coats tighter around herself. "You do not have to pretend to care. You saved my life and I am grateful, but I know what I am. Damaged goods, used up. When we get to Fort Worth, I will go to my aunt's house, and you can go on with your life and forget you ever saw me." "Is that what you think?" Bennett asked, his voice sharper than he intended. "That you are used up, that you have no value because bad people did bad things to you?" "It is what I know." "Then you know wrong." Bennett stood and paced the small cabin, needing to move, needing to channel the anger that had no proper target. "You survived, Miss Riley. Against odds that would have broken most people, you survived. You made a choice to live, to fight for a better life even when you had every reason to give up. That is not weakness. That is strength. That is courage. And anyone who tells you different is a fool or a liar or both." Theresa stared at him, her eyes wide with something that might have been hope if hope had not been beaten out of her long ago. "You are a strange man, Mr. Quinn." "Bennett. And yes, I suppose I am. My brother tells me that on a regular basis." He stopped pacing and knelt down beside her again. "Here is what is going to happen. We are going to wait out this storm together. I am going to make sure you eat and get your strength back. Then we are going to ride into Fort Worth, and I am going to personally escort you to your aunt's door. And if anyone, and I mean anyone, tries to stop us or give you trouble, they will have to answer to me. Does that sound acceptable?" "Why?" The question was barely a breath. "Why would you do all that for a stranger?" Bennett thought about his answer carefully. The truth was, he did not entirely know. Yes, his mother had raised him to be a decent man. Yes, he believed in helping those who needed help. But there was something more, something in Theresa Riley's green eyes that called to something deep in his chest, something he had thought long dead after his fiancée had left him 5 years ago to marry a banker with better prospects. "Because you need help," he said finally. "And because I can give it. That is reason enough." The storm raged for 2 full days. In that time, confined to the small cabin with nothing but each other for company, Bennett and Theresa began to know each other in ways that went beyond the simple exchange of names and histories. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversation ranging from the profound to the ridiculous. Bennett learned that Theresa loved books but had only ever owned two, both of which she had read so many times she could recite passages from memory. She told him about a spotted dog she had loved as a child, before her stepmother had given it away out of spite. She admitted that she had always wanted to see the ocean, though she knew she probably never would. In turn, Bennett told her about growing up on a cattle ranch in Oklahoma, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the restless spirit that had driven him to leave home at 18 and make his own way in the world. He spoke of his time as a deputy marshal in Kansas, the things he had seen and done that still haunted his dreams. He told her about his failed engagement, about how deeply it had hurt to be found wanting, and how he had poured himself into his work to avoid feeling anything at all. "That is a lonely way to live," Theresa observed on the second night as they sat by the fire eating the last of the jerky. "It is safe, though," Bennett replied. "Can't get hurt if you do not let anyone close enough to do the hurting. Can't be happy either." He looked at her, this woman who had every reason to be bitter and closed off, and saw instead an openness in her expression that caught him off guard. "You still believe in happiness? After everything you have been through?" "I have to," Theresa said simply. "Otherwise, what is the point? If I let what happened to me turn me into something hard and cold, then the people who hurt me win. They take everything I am and everything I might be. I cannot let them have that power over me. I will not." Something shifted in Bennett's chest, like a key turning in a lock he had not realized was there. He found himself moving closer to Theresa without conscious decision, drawn by a gravity he did not fully understand. "You are remarkable," he said softly. "Do you know that?" She ducked her head, a flush coloring her pale cheeks. "I am not. I am just stubborn." "No." He reached out and gently tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "You are remarkable and strong and brave, and I am very, very glad I found you in that snow." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with a sudden awareness that had not been there a moment before. Theresa's lips parted, and Bennett found his gaze drawn to them, wondering what they would feel like against his own. The urge to kiss her was almost overwhelming, but he held himself back. She had been through too much, endured too much at the hands of men who took what they wanted without asking. He would not be another man who took from her. Instead, he pulled back and cleared his throat. "We should get some sleep. If the weather clears tomorrow like I think it will, we will have a long ride ahead of us." If Theresa was disappointed by his retreat, she did not show it. She simply nodded and settled herself on the pile of old furs Bennett had found in a chest in the corner of the cabin. He took up position on the other side of the fire, determined to put distance between them, even if every fiber of his being screamed at him to close the gap. Sleep was a long time coming. The storm broke just before dawn on the third day, the wind dying away to nothing and leaving behind a world transformed by snow. The drifts came up past the cabin's single window, and when Bennett forced the door open, he had to dig a path just to get to where his horse was sheltering under a lean-to attached to the cabin's side. The mare greeted him with a disgusted snort that seemed to say she had strong opinions about his choice of accommodations. "I know, girl," Bennett murmured, stroking her neck. "But we had good reason, you will see." By the time the sun was fully up, They were ready to travel. Theresa's dress had dried, though it was still pathetically thin for the weather. Bennett insisted she wear his heavy coat while he made do with his lighter jacket and an extra shirt. She protested, but he overrode her objections with a firmness that brooked no argument. The ride to Fort Worth took the better part of the day. The snow made the going slow, and they had to stop frequently to rest the horse, who was carrying double and struggling with the uneven terrain. Bennett kept his arm around Theresa's waist, telling himself it was simply to keep her steady on the horse, ignoring the way his heart sped up whenever she leaned back against his chest. They talked less during the ride than they had in the cabin, both of them conserving energy and focusing on the journey. But the silence between them was comfortable, the kind of quiet that spoke of an understanding that went beyond words. When Theresa did speak, it was to point out a hawk circling overhead or to comment on the strange beauty of the snow-covered landscape. Bennett found himself looking at the world through her eyes, seeing wonder in things he had long since stopped noticing. Fort Worth appeared on the horizon just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the snow-covered buildings in shades of orange and pink. It was not a large town by any means, but after days in the wilderness, it looked like paradise to Theresa. She straightened in the saddle, her body tensing with a mixture of anticipation and fear. "What if she does not want me?" Theresa asked suddenly, voicing the worry that had clearly been eating at her. "What if she does not remember me, or what if she cannot afford to take me in?" "Then we will figure something else out," Bennett said with a confidence he hoped was reassuring. "You are not alone in this, Theresa. I meant what I said. I am going to see this through." They made their way through the streets of Fort Worth, drawing curious glances from the few people hardy enough to be out in the cold. Bennett navigated from memory, guiding his horse toward the south side of town, where Margaret Bloom's boarding house stood. It was a two-story structure painted a cheerful yellow, with a wide porch and shutters that had been recently repaired. Smoke rose from the chimney, a welcoming sign of warmth and life within. Bennett dismounted first, then helped Theresa down. She stood on the snowy street, staring up at the boarding house like it might disappear if she blinked. Her hands were shaking, and not from the cold. Bennett took one of her hands in his and squeezed gently. "You can do this," he said. "I am right here beside you." Together, they walked up the porch steps. Bennett knocked on the door, and after a moment it swung open to reveal a woman in her late 50s with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes went from Bennett to Theresa, widening with recognition even after all these years. "Theresa!" Margaret Bloom's voice was hoarse with shock. "Dear God, is that really you, Aunt Margaret?" Theresa's voice broke on the name, and then she was moving forward, collapsing into her aunt's arms with a sob that seemed torn from the depths of her soul. Margaret held her tightly, murmuring soothing words and stroking her hair, her own eyes bright with tears. Bennett stood back, feeling like an intruder on this moment of reunion. He was about to quietly take his leave when Margaret looked up and caught his eye. "You brought her here," she said. "It was not a question." "I found her in the snow," Bennett replied. "She would have frozen to death if I had not." Margaret's expression softened, and she mouthed two words. "Thank you." Bennett nodded, then turned to go. He had done what he set out to do. Theresa was safe with family who clearly loved her. His job was done. He could ride away and get back to his own life, to the work waiting for him, to the careful solitude he had cultivated for so long. But when he reached the bottom of the porch steps, he found he could not make himself walk any farther. His feet refused to carry him away from that yellow boarding house, away from the woman with green eyes who had somehow worked her way under his skin in just 3 days. "Bennett," Theresa's voice called out, tentative and hopeful. He turned to find her standing at the top of the steps, her aunt's arm around her shoulders. "Where are you going?" "I thought you would want time with your aunt," he said carefully. "I did not want to intrude." "You are not intruding." Theresa took a step forward, then another, descending the stairs until she stood right in front of him. "You saved my life. You were kind to me when you had no reason to be. You made me feel human again. That is not something I can just let walk away." "What are you saying?" Bennett asked, his heart beginning to pound. "I am saying please do not leave. Not yet. Not before I have a chance to thank you properly." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers cold but her grip firm. "I am saying that these past 3 days meant something to me. I hope they meant something to you too." Bennett looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face, so full of hope and fear and something else he was afraid to name. "They meant everything," he admitted, the words escaping before he could stop them. "You mean everything." The smile that spread across Theresa's face was like the sun breaking through clouds after a storm. She threw her arms around his neck, and Bennett caught her, holding her close and breathing in the scent of her hair, smoke and snow and something uniquely her. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining. "Then come inside," she said. "Come inside and get warm. Stay for supper. Stay for however long you want. Just please do not disappear from my life as suddenly as you appeared in it." How could Bennett say no to that? He let her lead him back up the stairs and into the boarding house, where Margaret was waiting with a knowing smile on her face. The interior was cozy and well kept, with furniture that had seen better days but was clean and comfortable. A fire roared in the parlor fireplace, and the smell of something delicious cooking wafted from the kitchen. Margaret installed them both at her kitchen table and set about making hot tea while Theresa told her aunt the story of the past weeks. Bennett watched Margaret's face go through a series of emotions. Anger at the stepmother and husband who had abused her niece, sorrow for the years of suffering, pride at Theresa's courage in escaping, and finally, gratitude toward Bennett for his intervention. "You are welcome to stay here as long as you like, Mr. Quinn," Margaret said when Theresa had finished. "Any man who would brave a blizzard to save a stranger is a man of character, and I keep a respectable house. I have a room available on the 2nd floor. I appreciate the offer, Mrs. Bloom, but I have business to attend to. I was heading to Fort Worth to meet with a man about buying some land west of here. I am planning to start a horse ranch." "Then you will be staying in the area?" Theresa asked, leaning forward with an eagerness she did not try to hide. "If the land is what the seller claims it is, then yes. I have been saving for years to buy my own place, somewhere I can put down roots." He glanced at Theresa. "I am tired of wandering." "Then you must stay here while you conduct your business," Margaret insisted. "No arguments. You saved my niece's life. The least I can do is provide you with a warm bed and hot meals while you are in town." And so it was decided. Bennett took his horse to the livery stable, arranged for her care, and returned to the boarding house to settle into a small but comfortable room on the 2nd floor. That evening he joined Theresa and Margaret for supper, along with the 3 other boarders, an elderly widow named Mrs. Patterson, a young schoolteacher called Eleanor Jones, and a traveling salesman named Harold Wickham, who spent most of the meal talking about the various wonders he had for sale. It was the most normal evening Bennett had spent in years, sitting around a table with other people, sharing food and conversation and laughter. He found his eyes constantly drawn to Theresa, who seemed to be blooming before his eyes now that she was safe and warm and well fed. The gauntness was still there, but color had returned to her cheeks, and when she laughed at one of Eleanor's stories about her students, the sound was like music. After supper, while Margaret and the other boarders settled in the parlor, Bennett and Theresa slipped out onto the porch. The night was cold but clear, the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. They stood side by side, not touching but close enough that Bennett could feel the warmth radiating from her body. "I never thanked you properly," Theresa said after a long moment of companionable silence. "For everything, for saving me, for being kind, for seeing me as a person and not just a problem to be solved." "You do not need to thank me," Bennett replied. "I did what anyone decent would do." "No." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "You did what you would do because you are who you are. Most people would have ridden past. Most people would not have cared, but you stopped. You cared. You made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserve to be happy. You do deserve it." Bennett could not stop himself from reaching out to tuck a strand of dark hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "You deserve every happiness this world has to offer." Theresa leaned into his touch, her eyes drifting closed for just a moment. When they opened again, they were full of longing. "I know we have only known each other for 3 days. I know it is too soon to feel the way I feel. But Bennett, I cannot help it. When I am with you, I feel safe. I feel seen. I feel like myself again, like the girl I was before everything went wrong." "How do you feel?" Bennett asked, his voice rough with emotion he could no longer contain. "Like I am falling in love with you," Theresa whispered. "Like I have been falling since the moment I opened my eyes in that cabin and saw you looking down at me like I mattered." Bennett's heart felt like it might burst out of his chest. He framed her face with both hands, tilting it up toward his. "I feel it too. I have been fighting it, telling myself it is too fast, too much, too soon. But Theresa, I have never felt like this before. Not even with the woman I thought I was going to marry. This is different. This is real." "Then kiss me," Theresa breathed. "Please, I need to know this is real." So Bennett kissed her, finally closing the distance he had been fighting for days. Her lips were soft and warm under his, and when she sighed and melted against him, wrapping her arms around his neck, he felt like he had finally come home after a lifetime of wandering. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape and taste of each other. But then Theresa made a soft sound in the back of her throat, and something broke loose inside Bennett. He deepened the kiss, pulling her closer, pouring 3 days of pent-up longing into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Theresa was smiling up at him with joy so pure it almost hurt to see. "That was worth waiting for," she said. "It was worth everything," Bennett agreed. "You are worth everything." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, talking quietly about the future they were just beginning to imagine together. Bennett told her about his plans for the ranch, about the horses he wanted to raise and train, about the house he wanted to build with his own 2 hands. Theresa listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking questions, her mind already racing ahead to picture what he described. "I want to help," she said suddenly. "If you will let me, I am good with horses. My father, for all his faults, taught me how to handle them, and I am a hard worker. I know I do not look like much right now, but I am stronger than I appear." "I know you are," Bennett said, kissing the top of her head. "And yes, I would love your help. But Theresa, I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we build a life together, I want to do it right. I want to court you properly. I want to give you time to heal from what you have been through. I want you to be sure about me, about us, before we make any decisions we cannot take back." Theresa pulled back to look at him, her expression solemn. "I understand, and I appreciate that more than you know. But Bennett, I am already sure. I was sure when you told me I would walk beside you in warmth. I was sure when you stayed with me through the storm instead of leaving me at that cabin and going for help. I was sure when you looked at me like I was something precious instead of something broken." "You are precious," Bennett said fiercely, And you are not broken, bent maybe, scarred definitely, but not broken, never broken. Then bend with me, Theresa said, taking his hand and lacing their fingers together. Build something new with me. Be the person I walk beside in warmth for the rest of my life. It was too fast. It was reckless. It was everything Bennett had sworn he would never do again after his heart had been broken before. But it was also right in a way that transcended logic or caution. Standing there on that porch with snow crunching under their feet and stars wheeling overhead, Bennett knew with absolute certainty that Theresa Riley was his future. She was the home he had been searching for without knowing it, the missing piece that made all the scattered parts of his life make sense. Yes, he said simply. Yes to all of it, to you, to us, to whatever comes next. The smile Theresa gave him then was bright enough to light up the entire world. Over the next several weeks, Bennett threw himself into the business of building a new life. He met with the land seller, a crusty old rancher named Carl Thompson, who was looking to retire and move closer to his daughter in Dallas. The property was everything Bennett could have hoped for. 300 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, backed by rolling hills that provided natural shelter from the worst of the weather. There was an old barn that needed repairs but had good bones, and a stone foundation where a house had once stood before a fire claimed it. Bennett and Carl negotiated for 2 days before finally settling on a price that left Bennett with enough money left over to buy lumber and supplies for rebuilding. The day they signed the papers, making the land officially his, Bennett rode straight back to Fort Worth to tell Theresa. He found her in Margaret's kitchen, helping her aunt prepare supper for the boarders. Her sleeves were rolled up to her elbows, her hair tied back with a ribbon, and there was flour on her nose. She looked beautiful. I got it, Bennett announced, unable to keep the grin off his face. The land is mine. Theresa dropped the spoon she was holding and flew across the kitchen, throwing herself into his arms with a whoop of joy that made Margaret laugh. Tell me everything, she demanded. I want to hear every single detail. So Bennett told her about the land, about the creek and the hills and the barn and his plans for where to build the house. Theresa listened with shining eyes, asking questions and offering suggestions, already seeing in her mind's eye what the place could become. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and by the time Bennett finished describing it all, even practical Margaret was caught up in the excitement. When can I see it? Theresa asked. Tomorrow, if you like. We can ride out together. I want you to see what you are getting into before you commit to a half-crazy cowboy with more dreams than sense. Too late, Theresa said, standing on her toes to kiss his cheek. I committed to you the moment you said I would walk beside you in warmth. Everything else is just details. They rode out to the property the next morning, Theresa sitting in front of Bennett on his horse, her back against his chest and his arm secure around her waist. The snow had melted enough to make travel easier, though there were still drifts in the shaded areas and the ground was muddy in places. When they crested the final hill and Bennett's land spread out before them, Theresa gasped, "Oh, Bennett, it is perfect." And it was. The morning sun turned the water in the creek to silver, and the hills rolled away to the horizon in shades of brown and gold and faded green. The barn stood solid and square, its red paint faded but its structure sound. And everywhere, there was space, glorious space to grow and build and breathe. Bennett dismounted and helped Theresa down, then watched as she walked the property, taking it all in with wonder on her face. She paced out where she thought the house should go, arguing for a spot that would give them a view of the sunrise. She examined the barn with a critical eye, pointing out where the roof would need patching and where new stalls could be built. She waded into the creek, laughing when the cold water splashed up to soak her skirts and declared it perfect for watering horses. "You can really see it," Bennett said, coming to stand beside her. "All of it." "Of course I can. This is going to be our home." She said it with such certainty that Bennett felt his throat tighten with emotion. Our home. Not his home or her home, but theirs, built together from nothing but hope and hard work and love. "Theresa Riley," Bennett said, taking her hands in his. "I know we have only known each other for a few weeks. I know there is still so much we do not know about each other, but I also know that I love you. I love your strength and your courage and the way you look at the world like it is full of possibilities instead of disappointments. I love how you make me want to be a better man. I love that when I think about the future, you are in every single vision of it." Tears were streaming down Theresa's face, but she was smiling. "I love you too. I think I started loving you when I was still half frozen and you promised me warmth. You have kept that promise every day since. You have shown me what it means to be treated with respect and kindness. You have given me a reason to believe in tomorrow. Then marry me." The words came out in a rush, unplanned and unstoppable. "Marry me and build this ranch with me. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making you happy. I know I am rushing this. I know I should wait. But Theresa, life is short and uncertain, and I have wasted too many years already being careful and cautious. I do not want to waste another second not being yours. Yes." Theresa was laughing and crying at the same time, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted of salt and joy. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. I will marry you, Bennett Quinn. I will walk beside you in warmth for the rest of our days." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Fort Worth, with Margaret serving as witness and a handful of the townspeople Bennett had befriended attending to celebrate with them. Theresa wore a simple dress of pale blue that Margaret had helped her sew, and Bennett wore his best suit, the one he had been saving for special occasions. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Bennett kissed his bride with all the love in his heart, and Theresa kissed him back with equal passion, not caring who saw or what anyone thought. The wedding breakfast was held at Margaret's boarding house, a cheerful affair full of good food and better company. Eleanor, the schoolteacher, played piano while Harold, the salesman, regaled everyone with stories that were probably only half true. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears and pressed a hand-embroidered tablecloth into Theresa's hands as a wedding gift. And Margaret, practical Margaret, gave them a set of cooking pots and a stern lecture about making sure to write to her regularly. When the sun began to set, Bennett and Theresa said their goodbyes and rode out to the ranch, to the small cabin Bennett had built over the past 3 weeks with help from some local men who owed him favors. It was just one room with a loft, nowhere near as grand as the house Bennett planned to build eventually, but it was solid and weatherproof, and most importantly, theirs. Bennett carried Theresa over the threshold, making her laugh with the solemnity he brought to the gesture. Inside, a fire was already crackling in the fireplace, courtesy of Margaret, who had come out earlier to make sure everything was ready for the newlyweds. There were blankets on the bed, food in the cupboard, and wildflowers in a jar on the table. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn," Bennett said, setting Theresa down gently. She turned in his arms, her green eyes luminous in the firelight. "It already feels like home," she said, "because you are here." They made love that night with a tenderness that brought tears to both their eyes. Theresa was nervous, her body still carrying the memory of unkindness, but Bennett was patient, taking his time, showing her with every touch and kiss that she was cherished, that her pleasure mattered as much as his. When she finally relaxed into his arms, trusting him with all that she was, the connection between them deepened into something that went beyond the physical. It was a joining of souls, a promise made flesh, a new beginning written in shared breath and whispered words of love. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the blankets, watching the fire cast dancing shadows on the walls and listening to the wind whisper across the prairie outside. "Are you happy?" Bennett asked, stroking Theresa's hair. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied. "Sometimes I am afraid I am going to wake up and find out this was all a dream, that I am still in the snow, freezing to death, and this is just my mind giving me comfort as I die." Bennett tightened his arms around her. "This is real. I am real. Our life together is real. And I promise you, Theresa, I am going to spend every day proving that to you until you never doubt it again. I believe you." She tilted her face up to kiss him softly. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for letting me," Bennett replied. "For giving me a reason to stop running and start building. For being brave enough to hope for more even when hope seemed impossible." They fell asleep in each other's arms, warm and safe and loved, while outside the stars wheeled across the vast Texas sky. The first year of their marriage was hard work from dawn to dusk. Bennett was determined to get the ranch running properly before winter came again, which meant long days of mending fences, repairing the barn, breaking ground for a garden, and making the trip to Fort Worth to buy supplies, and the first of the horses he planned to train. Theresa worked beside him every step of the way, proving that her claim to be good with horses had not been empty boasting. She had a natural affinity for the animals, a patience and gentleness that made even the most skittish colt settle under her hands. They started small, with 6 young horses purchased from a breeder in Dallas who was selling off stock. Bennett's plan was to train them as working horses, the kind of reliable mounts that cowboys and farmers needed and would pay good money for. It was not glamorous work, but it was honest, and there was satisfaction in watching a green horse transform under careful training into a trustworthy partner. Theresa proved to have a gift for training that matched Bennett's own. While he worked with the horses on basic commands and behavior, she focused on building trust, spending hours just being present with the animals, letting them learn her scent and her voice. The results spoke for themselves. Within 6 months, they had sold 3 of the horses for prices higher than Bennett had dared hope for, and word began to spread that the Quinn Ranch produced quality stock. With the money from those sales, Bennett was able to buy more lumber and begin work on the house he had promised Theresa. They spent their evenings sketching plans by lamplight, debating how many rooms they would need and where to put windows to catch the best light. Theresa wanted a big kitchen with space for a proper table where they could host family and friends. Bennett insisted on a front porch wide enough for rocking chairs, where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over their land. The house slowly took shape over the following months. Bennett did most of the heavy construction work, but Theresa was always there helping, handing him tools, holding boards steady, offering suggestions when problems arose. They worked well together, their partnership extending from the horse training into every aspect of building their life. By the time their first anniversary arrived, the house was finished enough to move into, though there was still work to be done on the interior. It was a modest 2-story structure with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, a parlor, and Bennett's promised front porch. Theresa cried when Bennett carried her over the threshold for the second time in their marriage, overwhelmed by the reality of having a real home, a place that was truly hers and could never be taken away. They celebrated their anniversary by hosting a dinner party, inviting Margaret and a few of the neighbors they had gotten to know over the past year. It was a joyful evening full of laughter and good food, and when everyone had gone home, Bennett and Theresa sat on their new porch under the stars, holding hands and talking about the future. "I have been thinking," Theresa said, her voice soft in the darkness, "about what comes next." "What do you mean?" "I mean us. Our family. I know we have been careful, taking precautions. But Bennett, I want a baby. I want to have your child and raise them here on this land, surrounded by love instead of fear. I want to give them the childhood I never had." Bennett felt his heart swell with emotion so powerful it almost choked him. "Are you sure? We have only been married a year. We are still getting the ranch established. It would be hard, adding a baby into the mix." "I know it would be hard. But I also know that I love you, and I want to build a family with you. Not someday in the distant future, but now. Life is uncertain, Bennett. We both know that better than most. I do not want to wait for perfect circumstances that might never come. I want to start living the life we dream about." Bennett pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Then yes, let us make a family. Let us fill this house with love and laughter and the sound of little feet running across the floors." Theresa turned in his arms and kissed him deeply. And when he lifted her and carried her into their house and up the stairs to their bedroom, there was no hesitation or holding back. They made love with the full knowledge and hope that this time they might be creating a new life, and the thought made every touch, every kiss feel sacred. 2 months later, Theresa confirmed what they had both hoped for. She was pregnant. The news filled them both with a joy so profound, it was almost frightening in its intensity. Bennett found himself constantly worrying about Theresa, trying to get her to rest more and work less. While she insisted, she was perfectly fine and capable of doing everything she had been doing before. "I am growing a baby, not dying of some rare disease," she told him with exasperation when he tried for the third time in one day to convince her to sit down. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I promise you, I know my own limits. I just want you to be safe," Bennett said. "Both of you." Theresa's expression softened and she took his hands, placing them on her belly, which was just beginning to show the gentle swell of pregnancy. "We are safe. We have you to take care of us. But Bennett, I need to stay active. I need to keep working, keep contributing. It is important to me. Please understand that." So Bennett tried to ease back on his hovering, though it went against every protective instinct he possessed. He threw himself into work, determined to build up their savings so that Theresa would not have to worry about anything except staying healthy and growing their baby. He took on extra training jobs, working with difficult horses that other trainers had given up on. His reputation continued to grow, and people came from as far away as Austin to buy Quinn-trained horses. Margaret came to stay with them a month before Theresa's due date, much to everyone's relief. The older woman took charge of the household with practiced efficiency, making sure Theresa ate properly and got enough rest, and also providing companionship during the long days when Bennett had to be out working with the horses. The two women grew even closer during this time, Margaret sharing stories of Theresa's mother, whom she had loved dearly, and Theresa finally having the chance to ask questions about the family history that had always been kept from her. When Theresa went into labor on a warm evening in September of 1883, Bennett panicked despite all his intentions to remain calm. He sent one of the ranch hands racing into Fort Worth to fetch the doctor, then paced the parlor like a caged animal while Margaret and the neighbor women tended to Theresa upstairs. The sounds of her pain tore at him, making him feel utterly helpless, but every time he tried to go to her, Margaret shooed him away, insisting that childbirth was women's work and he would just be in the way. It was the longest night of Bennett's life. When dawn finally broke and a baby's cry pierced the air, he practically fell to his knees with relief. Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs a few minutes later, her face tired but wreathed in smiles. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy with a fine set of lungs." And Theresa came through like a champion. "You can come meet your family now." Bennett took the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the bedroom. Theresa was propped up against pillows, looking exhausted but radiant with a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. When she saw Bennett, her face lit up with pure joy. "Come see him," she said softly. "Come meet our son." Bennett approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at the baby in Theresa's arms. He was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air as he fussed. He was the most beautiful thing Bennett had ever seen. "Can I hold him?" Bennett asked, his voice rough with unshed tears. Theresa carefully transferred the baby to Bennett's arms, showing him how to support the head. The moment Bennett held his son, something fundamental shifted in his world. The love he felt for Theresa, already immense, expanded to encompass this tiny new person who was part of both of them. He would die for this child. He would kill for this child. He would move mountains and drain oceans if that was what it took to keep him safe and happy. "What should we name him?" Theresa asked. They had discussed names endlessly over the past months, but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son's scrunched-up face, Bennett knew exactly what felt right. "James," he said. "James Matthew Quinn, after my father and yours." Tears spilled down Theresa's cheeks. Her father had not been a good man in many ways, but he had taught her to love horses, and those early years before her mother died had held some happiness. Honoring that part of her past felt right. "James Matthew Quinn," she repeated, tasting the name. "It is perfect. He is perfect." "You are perfect," Bennett said, carefully returning the baby to her arms so he could kiss her. "Thank you. Thank you for him. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for being the bravest, strongest woman I have ever known." The days after James's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings, of learning how to care for an infant and marveling at every tiny expression, every sound. Bennett discovered reserves of patience he did not know he possessed, walking the floors at night with his son when Theresa needed to rest, singing old cowboy songs in a soft voice until James's cries subsided into sleep. Margaret stayed for another month, teaching Theresa everything she knew about caring for a baby and generally making herself indispensable. When she finally returned to Fort Worth, promising to visit often, the house felt emptier without her presence, but Bennett and Theresa had found their rhythm as new parents. Life settled into a new normal over the following months. The ranch continued to thrive, with more horses to train and more customers than Bennett could easily handle. He hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men from Fort Worth who were eager to learn the trade. Theresa, once she recovered from childbirth, returned to working with the horses, though now she did so with James strapped to her back in a sling, the baby contentedly watching the world go by while his mother worked. James was a happy baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss, and he clearly inherited his parents' love of horses. By the time he was 6 months old, Bennett was setting him in the saddle in front of him for short rides around the property, and James would shriek with laughter, his little hands tangled in the horse's mane. When James was a year old, they threw a birthday party that brought together everyone who had become important in their lives. Margaret and the boarders from Fort Worth, the neighbors from surrounding ranches, the ranch hands who had become like family. It was a testament to how far they had come, from 2 broken people who found each other in the snow to a thriving family at the center of a community they had helped build. That night, after all the guests had gone and James was asleep in his cradle, Bennett and Theresa sat on their porch as had become their habit. Theresa was tucked against Bennett's side, his arm around her shoulders, both of them watching the stars. "You ever think about that day?" Theresa asked quietly. "The day you found me in the snow, every day," Bennett admitted. "It is the day my real life began, mine too." She tilted her face up to look at him. "I was so lost then, so broken. I did not think I had any future at all. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I did not even know I was praying. You gave me back my life." "You did that yourself," Bennett corrected gently. "I just helped you remember how strong you were, how much you deserved to be loved and happy. The rest was all you." "We did it together," Theresa said. "Everything we have, everything we are, we built it together. That is what makes it so precious. And Bennett, I want more. More children, more years, more everything. I want to grow old with you on this porch, watching our grandchildren play in the yard." "That sounds like heaven," Bennett agreed. "Though I hope you are not planning on having those grandchildren anytime soon. James is barely walking." Theresa laughed. "No, not too soon. But maybe in a year or two a little brother or sister for James would not be unwelcome." "As you wish, Mrs. Quinn. I am entirely at your service." She swatted his arm playfully, then kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. They sat there for a long while more, wrapped in each other's warmth, counting their blessings and dreaming of the future. Time flowed on as it always does, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of family life. 2 years after James was born, Theresa gave birth to a daughter they named Mary Elizabeth, a tiny thing with her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn determination. James adored his little sister from the moment he met her, insisting on helping with everything from feeding to diaper changes, his childish earnestness making both his parents laugh even as it warmed their hearts. The ranch grew along with the family. Bennett's reputation as a horse trainer had spread throughout Texas and beyond, and he could hardly keep up with the demand for his services. He and Theresa made a formidable team, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. Where Bennett was skilled at the technical aspects of training, Theresa had an intuitive understanding of what each horse needed, an ability to read their moods and adjust her approach accordingly. They expanded the barn, built additional corrals, and eventually constructed a second house on the property to accommodate a foreman and his family. The ranch that had started as little more than a dream was now a thriving business that employed half a dozen people and produced some of the finest working horses in the state. But success never changed the fundamental nature of who Bennett and Theresa were. They remained humble and hardworking, never forgetting where they had come from or how easily it all could have been different. They were generous with their neighbors, always ready to lend a hand when someone was in need. And they were devoted to each other and their children with a fierceness that everyone who knew them could see. When James was 5 and Mary was 3, Theresa became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first two, leaving her tired and sick for months. Bennett worried constantly, but Theresa assured him that some pregnancies were just like that, and the doctor confirmed she was healthy, just uncomfortable. Their third child, a son they named William Thomas, arrived on a snowy December morning, and Bennett could not help but think about that other snowstorm 4.5 years earlier that had brought Theresa into his life. William was a quiet baby, serious where James had been playful, watchful where Mary was bold. But he was healthy and loved, and that was all that mattered. Margaret, who had become a fixture in their lives, visiting for weeks at a time and celebrating every holiday with them, was starting to slow down. She was nearly 70 now, and running the boarding house had become too much for her. After long discussions, it was decided that she would sell the business and come live with Bennett and Theresa permanently. They built her a small cottage on the ranch property, close enough that she could be with family, but far enough that she had her privacy when she wanted it. Having Margaret there was a blessing for everyone. She doted on her great-niece and great-nephews, telling them stories and teaching them songs from her own childhood. She helped Theresa with the endless work of running a household, and she provided Bennett with the kind of family he had been missing since his own parents passed away years before. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. James grew into a tall, serious boy who inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's kind heart. Mary was a whirlwind of energy and opinions, fearless and funny and utterly charming. William was the quiet one, always observing, always thinking, with a mind that seemed to work on a different level than everyone else's. When James turned 10, Bennett began teaching him the finer points of horse training, passing on the knowledge and skills that had built their family's fortune. James took to it like he had been born for it, showing patience and dedication beyond his years. Mary insisted she wanted to learn too, and though Bennett initially hesitated to let his daughter engage in such rough work, Theresa pointed out that she had been training horses since before Mary was born, and their daughter deserved the same opportunities as their son. So Mary joined the lessons, and she proved to be every bit as talented as her brother, with an additional flair for riding that took Bennett's breath away. By the time she was 12, she could outride most grown men, and she had won several local competitions that had people from 3 counties talking. William, to everyone's surprise, showed less interest in horses than in books. He spent hours in the small library Theresa had built up over the years, reading everything he could get his hands on. When he was 8, Bennett and Theresa arranged for him to attend school in Fort Worth during the week, staying with a family friend and coming home on weekends. It was hard to be separated from him, but they knew they needed to support his hunger for education, even if it took him in a different direction than the ranch. Through all of this, Bennett and Theresa's love never wavered. If anything, it grew deeper with time, tempered by the challenges they had overcome together and sweetened by the life they had built. They still made time for each other, still sat on their porch in the evenings talking and dreaming, still looked at each other across crowded rooms, and felt that spark of connection that had begun in a tiny cabin during a blizzard. On their 10th anniversary, Bennett surprised Theresa with a trip to Galveston, just the two of them, leaving the children in Margaret's capable care. They stayed in a real hotel, ate in restaurants, and finally, Theresa got to see the ocean she had dreamed about as a girl. She stood on the beach with tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the vastness of it, and Bennett held her hand and thanked God for the 1000th time that he had stopped his horse that day, that he had looked through the snow and seen her. "You remember what you said to me?" Theresa asked as they walked along the shore. "That first day when I woke up in the cabin, I told you that you would walk beside me in warmth," Bennett said, "and you have. Every day since you have walked beside me." "We have walked together," Theresa corrected, "equal partners in everything." "That is what you gave me, Bennett. Not just love, though God knows you have given me more of that than I ever imagined possible. But you gave me the freedom to be myself, to be strong, to be capable. You never tried to make me less so you could be more. Why would I?" Bennett pulled her close, not caring that they were in public. "You are extraordinary exactly as you are. I have never wanted to change you. I have only ever wanted to love you." They kissed there on the beach, with the waves crashing behind them and seabirds wheeling overhead. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their separate pasts. When they returned home, they found that William had won a scholarship to a prestigious school in Dallas, one that would prepare him for university. It meant he would be even farther away, home only for holidays and summer breaks, and the decision to let him go was one of the hardest Bennett and Theresa had to make. But William's eyes shone with such hope when he talked about the opportunity that they could not bring themselves to say no. So at 13, William left for Dallas, taking with him his parents' blessings and a trunk full of books and clothes and love. The house felt emptier without him, but James and Mary more than made up for his absence with their energy and constant activity. The ranch continued to thrive under Bennett's guidance, with James taking on more and more responsibility as he grew older and showed his capability. When James was 16, Bennett made him a full partner in the ranch operations, acknowledging that his son had earned the right to have a say in decisions about their future. James accepted the responsibility with the seriousness it deserved, and father and son worked together with the same easy partnership that Bennett and Theresa had always shared. Mary, now 14, was dividing her time between helping with the horses and making the trip into Fort Worth for school, where she had proven to be an excellent student despite her initial reluctance to spend time on books instead of horseback. She had developed a reputation as something of a firebrand, always ready to argue for what she thought was right. And more than one young man had learned the hard way that Mary Quinn was not interested in traditional courtship rituals. "She is too much like you," Bennett told Theresa one evening after Mary had gotten into an argument with a neighboring rancher's son who had suggested that girls should not compete in riding events. "She is perfect," Theresa replied, not bothering to hide her pride. "She knows her worth, and she will not let anyone diminish it. That is exactly what I want for her." William came home for the summer between his first and second year at the Dallas school, and he was so changed that Bennett barely recognized him. He had grown tall and lean, with an intellectual air about him that spoke of hours spent in libraries and classrooms. But he was still their William, still quiet and thoughtful, still looking at the world with those observant eyes that missed nothing. That summer, William announced that he wanted to be a lawyer, specifically one who worked to help people who could not afford legal representation. He had seen too much injustice in Dallas, he said, too many people ground down by a system that favored the wealthy and powerful. He wanted to be part of changing that. Bennett and Theresa looked at each other across the dinner table, communicating without words as they so often did, and then Theresa reached out and took William's hand. "We are proud of you," she said simply. "Whatever path you choose, we will support you. You have a good heart and a brilliant mind. You are going to do amazing things." Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 weeks after that conversation, at the age of 74. She had been complaining of feeling tired, but none of them had realized how sick she actually was until it was too late. Her death hit them all hard, but especially Theresa, who had lost the last connection to her mother's family, the woman who had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go. They buried Margaret on the ranch, under a large oak tree where she had loved to sit and watch the children play. Nearly 100 people attended the funeral, a testament to how beloved she had been in the community. And when it was over and everyone had gone, Theresa stood by the grave and cried until Bennett thought her heart might break from the grief. "She saved me too," Theresa said when she could finally speak. "When you brought me to her door, I was so afraid she would turn me away. But she took me in without hesitation. She loved me. She gave me a family when I had none. And she got to see you thrive," Bennett reminded her gently. "She got to know your children. She got to live here with us, surrounded by love. That is a good end, Theresa." "That is the kind of ending everyone should have." Theresa nodded, leaning into Bennett's embrace. "I know, I am grateful for that. I am grateful for all of it, but I am still going to miss her terribly." "We all will," Bennett agreed. but we will honor her memory by continuing to love each other and to be the kind of family she was so proud to be part of. Time marched on, as it always does, bringing with it both joy and sorrow. James fell in love with a sweet girl from Fort Worth named Sarah Miller, and when he turned 21, he married her in a ceremony that brought back memories of Bennett and Theresa's own wedding 19 years earlier. Sarah fit seamlessly into the family, and within a year, she had given them their first grandchild, a boy they named Bennett after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Bennett felt the circle of his life complete itself in a way that took his breath away. This tiny person was part of his legacy, part of the love he and Theresa had built from nothing. When he looked up and met Theresa's eyes across the room, he saw his own awe and joy reflected back at him. Mary showed no signs of settling down, much to her mother's amusement and her father's occasional worry. She was 21 now, and she had turned the ranch's horse breeding operation into something truly special, developing lines of animals that were known throughout the state for their intelligence and temperament. She had suitors, but none of them seemed to meet her exacting standards, and she showed no inclination to compromise on what she wanted in a partner. "Let her be," Theresa told Bennett when he fretted. "She will find someone when she is ready. Or she will not, and she will live a perfectly happy life on her own terms. Either way, it is her choice to make." William completed his law degree at 22 and passed the bar on his first attempt. He opened a practice in Fort Worth, taking on cases that other lawyers would not touch, representing people who had been wronged by the system. He worked long hours for little pay, but the satisfaction he got from helping people was evident every time he came home to visit. On a warm evening in the spring of 1902, 20 years after Bennett had found Theresa in the snow, they sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. They were both in their 50s now, their hair streaked with gray, their faces lined by years of hard work and laughter. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had been that first day, the desperate woman in the snow and the cowboy who had promised her warmth. 20 years, Theresa said wonderingly. "Has it really been that long?" "It has," Bennett confirmed. "And I would not change a single moment of it." "Well, maybe a few moments. I could have done without that time James broke his arm, or when Mary caught pneumonia, or when William fell off the barn roof and gave us all heart attacks." Theresa laughed, the sound still as beautiful to Bennett as it had been the first time he heard it. Parenthood does provide some anxiety-inducing moments, does it not? But you are right. I would not change any of it either, not even the hard parts. They made us who we are. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if I had not found you that day?" Bennett asked. "I try not to," Theresa admitted. "Because I know how that story ends. I would have frozen to death in the snow, alone and afraid, never knowing that happiness was possible. You saved me, Bennett, not just my life but my soul. You showed me that I was worth loving, worth fighting for. You gave me a reason to live instead of just survive." "You did the same for me," Bennett said, reaching for her hand. "I was so closed off before I met you, so afraid of being hurt again that I had forgotten how to feel anything real. You opened me up. You taught me that love is worth the risk, that building something with another person is the most meaningful thing you can do with your life." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the land they had built their lives on. In the distance, they could see James and Sarah's house, smoke rising from the chimney. From the barn came the sound of Mary's voice, talking to the horses as she always did when she thought no one was listening. And somewhere in Fort Worth, William was probably still at his desk, fighting for justice one case at a time. "We did all right, did we not?" Theresa said. "With all of this?" With our children, with the ranch, with each other. We did better than all right, Bennett replied. We built something extraordinary from absolutely nothing. We took two broken people and made a whole family. We created a legacy that is going to continue long after we are gone. That is more than most people can say. Theresa rested her head on Bennett's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. You know what the best part is? She asked. After all these years, after all we have been through together, I still get butterflies when you walk into a room. I still look at you and feel like the luckiest woman alive. I am still falling in love with you, every single day. You are going to make me cry, Bennett said, his voice rough with emotion. And I have a reputation as a tough cowboy to maintain. Your secret is safe with me, Theresa promised, tilting her face up for a kiss. They kissed there on the porch as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a love story for the ages. Around them, the ranch was settling into evening quiet, the horses nickering softly in their stalls, the wind whispering through the grass, the crickets beginning their nightly chorus. Inside the house, there were grandchildren to spoil and children to guide and work to be done and a life to be lived. But for this moment, there was just the two of them, Bennett and Theresa Quinn, holding each other close and counting their blessings. The years that followed brought more changes, as years always do. James and Sarah had two more children, giving Bennett and Theresa a total of 3 grandchildren to dote on. Mary finally met her match in a horse trainer from California, who was as passionate about breeding as she was, and their wedding was a joyous celebration that drew people from 6 states. William married a fellow lawyer, a brilliant woman who shared his commitment to justice, and they set up a joint practice that quickly became known as the place to go when you needed someone to fight for you. The ranch continued to thrive under James's leadership, with Mary and her husband expanding the breeding operation in ways Bennett had never imagined. Bennett gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations, content to serve as an advisor and to spend more time with Theresa, enjoying the fruits of all their years of labor. They traveled some in their later years, taking trips to places Theresa had always dreamed of seeing. They went to California and saw the Pacific Ocean. They visited New Mexico and marveled at the desert landscape. They took a train to Chicago and were overwhelmed by the size and noise of the city, grateful to return to the wide open spaces of Texas. But no matter where they went or what they saw, they always came home to the ranch, to the house Bennett had built with his own hands, to the land they had poured their sweat and blood and tears into. This was where they belonged together, surrounded by the family and community they had created. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together everyone from their life. Old friends from Fort Worth, neighboring ranchers, people Bennett had trained horses for over the years, families that William and his wife had helped through legal troubles. It was a testament to the impact they had made, not through wealth or fame, but through simple decency and hard work and genuine care for others. As Bennett stood in the yard of his ranch, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, with Theresa's hand in his, he thought back to that day 30 years ago when he had found a half-frozen woman in the snow. He had had no idea that stopping to help a stranger would change the entire trajectory of his life. He had not known that the woman he saved would end up saving him right back. He could never have imagined the life they would build together, the love they would share, the family they would create. "What are you thinking about?" Theresa asked, coming to stand beside him as the party wound down and guests began to leave. "That day in the snow," Bennett said. "How different everything would be if I had ridden past, if I had not trusted my horse's instincts." If I had been 5 minutes later and not found you in time. But you did not ride past, Theresa said, squeezing his hand. You stopped. You helped. You kept your promise to make sure I would walk beside you in warmth, and I have every day since. In the warmth of your love, in the warmth of our home, in the warmth of the life we have built together. And you will continue to, Bennett said, for as long as we both shall live, because Theresa, you are the warmth, you are the light, you are everything that matters. They kissed as the sun set on their 30th anniversary, two people who had defied the odds and built a love that would endure long after they were gone. Around them, their family watched and smiled, seeing in their grandparents the kind of love they hoped to find for themselves someday. Bennett and Theresa Quinn lived many more happy years together, growing old side by side on the ranch they had built from nothing. They saw their grandchildren grow up and have children of their own. They watched their legacy expand in directions they never could have imagined. And through it all, they held tight to each other, never forgetting that everything they had started with a promise made in a snowstorm. You will walk beside me in warmth. When Bennett passed away peacefully at the age of 78, with Theresa holding his hand and their children and grandchildren surrounding his bed, his last words were of love. Thank you, he whispered to Theresa, his eyes still bright even as his body failed, for walking beside me, for being my warmth, for being my everything. Theresa lived for 5 more years after Bennett's death, surrounded by family who loved her and honored her. She spent her days sharing stories about the grandfather the younger children had never known, keeping his memory alive through her words. She worked in the garden she and Bennett had planted together decades before. She sat on the porch in the evenings, looking at the stars and feeling his presence beside her. When her own time came, at the age of 81, she went peacefully in her sleep with a smile on her face. Her children liked to think she was dreaming of that moment when she first opened her eyes in a tiny cabin and saw a cowboy looking down at her with kindness in his eyes, promising her warmth, promising her a future, promising her love. They buried her next to Bennett, under the same oak tree where Margaret rested, with a stone that read simply, Theresa Riley Quinn. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she walked in warmth. The entire community turned out for her funeral, and the stories told that day painted a picture of a woman who had overcome impossible odds to build a life of meaning and purpose, who had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. The ranch continued for generations after them, always remaining in the family, always honoring the legacy of Bennett and Theresa Quinn. Their great-great-grandchildren walked the same land they had walked, worked with horses descended from the ones they had trained, and told their own children the story of how it all began with a cowboy finding a woman in the snow and promising her warmth. It was a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of compassion and courage and commitment. It proved that sometimes the most important moments in our lives happen when we stop, when we look beyond ourselves, when we reach out to help someone in need. And it showed that from the darkest moments, from the coldest winters, from the most desperate circumstances, love can bloom and flourish and create something beautiful that lasts forever. In the warmth of each other, Bennett and Theresa had found home. And that home, built on a foundation of love and trust and partnership, became a beacon for everyone lucky enough to know them. Their story was told and retold, passed down through the generations, a reminder that love, real love, can transform not just two people but everyone they touch. And so the Quinn Ranch stood for over 100 years, a monument to a promise kept, to a love that conquered all obstacles, to two souls who found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and chose, every day for the rest of their lives, to walk together in warmth.